Good afternoon, this is Chandra Easton here from Living in Light, StarAstrologyHealing.com, esoteric astrologer. I'm speaking to you about the esoteric nature of the sign of Taurus. Esoteric simply means from the hidden perspective or from the soul's perspective. The opposite to esoteric is exoteric. That's the worldly, the obvious perspective. So traditional astrology works with the exoteric, but this is the view of the sign of Taurus from the soul's eyes looking out at the world. Taurus is one of the signs of the zodiac that is connected to the three major spiritual festivals of the year. And particularly it's associated with the Buddha. You don't have to be Buddhist to be able to participate in the spiritual festival of the Vesak, as it is known, a festival of enlightenment. And this spiritual festival happens every year on the exact full moon, when the sun's in Taurus and the moon's directly opposite it in Scorpio. And for a 5-day period there's a window. This is 2.5 days before the exact full moon and 2.5 days after the exact full moon, when the sun's in Taurus and the moon's in Scorpio. We have a window of profound, it's a watershed. Imagine it as a window to the heavens, a window to your soul opens up, and earth receives a downpouring of light. Yes, but we need to know about this in order to be open to receive it. So I'm talking a little bit here about Taurus on the wheel of evolution, and Taurus is one of the signs that's associated with aspirancy, and therefore for humanity we often refer to the world aspirant, and the world aspirant is connected to a few signs of the zodiac, but Taurus is one of them. And what we're aspiring to is to be the best that we can be as a human, as a nation, at races, as a species. And if we're able to put our aspirations into practice, and that's the $6 million question for all of us, then we'll be able to lift in vibration, lift in consciousness, grow in spiritual light and stature and integrity and commitment. Everybody on Earth's aware that we're going through profound upheaval. Maybe you don't know that this is known as the Great Change, and the Great Change is the epoch. Think of it as the crossover point between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, and we need all the help that we can get to make this transition in order to lift our consciousness. And we get enormous amount of support and assistance on the three major festivals. The first major festival is the Aries full moon. That's generally in April, but not always, sometimes late March. The second, the Festival of Enlightenment, is the Vesak, known as the birth, the death and the enlightenment of the Buddha. And the third spiritual festival is the festival of the full moon in Gemini, the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius, otherwise known as the Asala. So the major theme when we're working with everything to do with Taurus is light. What we are striving for is more light. Light is it's an indicator that the soul is present and active. Yeah? And the opposite of light is darkness. You may be interested in listening to the talks on my website or the YouTube channel, From Darkness to Light. There are 3 talks there, and those talks focus upon the transit of Uranus through Taurus in the years 2019 to 2026. Yep, so we're trying to take off the blindfolds, open our inner sight. And the inner sight is, you think of it as the third eye, not the right eye or the left eye, but the brow chakra, the Ajna chakra. And we all have this opportunity and this possibility. We are all invited into greater light. It's important to understand that our egos resist. Our egos are the global ego, the national ego is afraid of the light. Why on earth would we be afraid of the light? It's because our ego loses the ability to be in charge, to control and direct our lives because the more light we have, the more we are listening to we've switched channels to the light of the soul. So this is the goal and the The purpose every year when the sun moves through Taurus, and especially on the full moon, we're attempting to shift gears to the frequency of light and to rip off the blindfolds, rip off the masks, rip off the ignorance, the fear, the hatred, the xenophobia, rip off the misuse of power. They're all the layers that are keeping us bound to matter. Whenever we speak about Taurus, we must speak about matter because it's an earth sign. Now, the traditional rulerships for Taurus is Venus, the planet Venus. So if we're operating from the exoteric or the worldly approach to Taurus, we're looking for Venus, we're looking for comfort, we're looking for food, we're looking for money, we're looking for security for ourselves, me and my. The esoteric ruler of Taurus is the planet Vulcan, downward pointing arrow that brings with it divine will, the fiery light of your soul and your immortal self to penetrate the darkness, it descends like a thunderbolt to help us to see whatever it is that we've been blind to. So if you don't know about the work of the Lady Ananda Tarashan through Heart Flow Worldwide and the Theosophical Fellowship, I encourage you to check out those websites and to find the book called The 17 Steps to Perfection, Ananda's fantastic meditation book. And the reason for this is that you can then meditate upon the planet Venus or the planet Vulcan or indeed any of the other planets in our solar system to assist you in this process of throwing off darkness and moving into greater light. So in this talk I'll be really just focusing upon some of the tests and the challenges that are happening for us as here we are in the second decade of the 21st century, individually and collectively. What are the things that we need to change in order to cooperate with the great change? What are the habits or the blindnesses that we need to give up? Okay, let's begin. Now, to me, blindness is like ignorance. Sometimes, things are just too hard and too difficult and we just don't want to know. There are a lot of inconvenient truths. And so we may prefer to be blind, to be ignorant, to put our heads in the sand, to let other people make the decisions for us, to remain childlike. But we won't grow spiritually. And humanity as a species won't grow and resolve some of the issues that are facing us if we have our heads in the sand and we abrogate our responsibilities. So we need to have our eyes wide open, to be able to see what there is to see, to make clear assessments of things rather than act blindly, motivated by fear, and hand over our responsibilities. One of the Taurus motivations or keynotes is to move from darkness to light. So I think of darkness when the material world is all there is. And I think of light as the movement towards a greater respect for the individuals, for the earth, for each other, a greater sharing, a greater soul light, to be the best that we can be, nationally, internationally, and as a species. Of course, we live in the material world, and not for 1 second suggesting that we don't, but to make all of our decisions based on the finite nature of material value, if everything's about the economy, everything's about money, and everything's about business, and everything's about my shelter, my food, my bank account, then we shut the door to light. Yes, and so opening the door to light is getting a healthy balance between the best that we can be, our spiritual selves, whilst in the midst of living a physical incarnation in the physical world. And the final of the three keynotes here that underpin the Taurian tests are a movement from death to liberation. Now, I'm not talking about physical death, although, of course, with the pandemic there has been an inordinate amount of physical death. And it's become very clear that the people who are dying in greater numbers, what did I hear this morning on the radio, that it's the Navajo Nation who live in the southwestern part of North America, who are dying in great numbers with the pandemic, as well as people in New York and other high density. And it's clearly because of their indigenous DNA that they are more vulnerable. Yeah? But it's not just about physical death. When we choose to move away from what I want, what my ego wants, to what's for the good of the whole, then the personal self, the ego, feels like it's dying. It feels like it's losing its ability to exist and be in control. So it's pretty clear that the end result of humanity's ego being in control has destroyed the planet. And now we are making plans to move off and to live in colonies on Mars, and are we going to destroy our solar system as well? So left to our own devices, our ego exploits the material for its own end, and this is the opposite of spiritual growth. This is a devolution. So to begin to change means, metaphorically, the death of the ego. And so if I identify myself as a person who must have exclusively and only money and power and food and resources to the detriment of others, then I've shut the door to the soul. And I've shut the door to my own liberation. So on a global level, we, humanity, are standing at the door or approaching the door to soul liberation, but our egos need to recognise that we have to work for the collective good, not the collective harm, not the collective manipulated, not collective control, but the collective good. Everybody knows that we have what are termed first world nations and third world nations and great powers, and I think Australia refers to themselves as a middle power. So, these sort of demarcations of the haves and the have-nots are indicators of the insular, personal, ego-driven approach that has got us to where we are at the beginning of the 21st century. And it's creating the death of hundreds and thousands of species that are going extinct, the death of coral reefs, the death of quality of life, the death through pollutants. It's creating death through pandemic. Yeah? So we are facing death, and we need to find ways of collectively moving towards the best that we can be, our soul's light, the heart of compassion needs to be more evident in the human species. So the tests and the trials and the tribulations around Taurus are all to do with who's in control of the desire. Yes, we're all human. We have a need to eat. We have a need for shelter. We need to have food. We have a need for work. But it must be sustainable. There's no point if all the wealth is in the hands of the multinational corporations and they decide what is for the good of the whole. There's no point if all the wealth is in the hands of, in Australia here, the 4 key banks, and they get to exploit and misuse and abuse. Yeah, there's no point if the power around matters to do with food and shelter and medicine and income is in the hands of governments who will use that power to harm, to control, to control through fear, to manipulate. Yeah? So we have to find a way of lifting the desire for control and power and the material to the aspiration for what is the best for the good of the whole. It's a big task. This is the task ahead of everyone. Those who don't even know there's a spiritual path, those who are approaching the spiritual path, those who have one foot on the edge of the path, those who are on the path. This is the challenge for all of us. We are living through a decay. The old world, the old paradigm is literally rotting and falling away. Taurus, on a material level, it governs land masses, physical resources, like for instance the farming, those who grow our food, trees, forests that give us shelter, the things that are important to possess or not possess, the nature of sanctuary, homes and money, as well as loved ones. Over the last, well, I don't know, is it 20 years? Is it longer? Is it 50 years? We've seen the breakdown of some of Earth's land masses. The polar caps are melting. We've seen the mega bushfires. We've seen all over the planet over decades the global refugee crisis. These people who are fleeing persecution and have no home. A seemingly never-ending tide of human misery. We have homelessness and war, which has highlighted the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. The material world is not for the benefit of the few, it is for the sharing of all. Increasingly, we've seen contamination of our air and of our food chain. We've seen environmental poisoning. We've seen the rape of the earth through the coal seam gas. We've seen genetically modified food so that we're eating things that really aren't good for us. We've seen the plastic contaminants of the oceans. We've seen the electromagnetic radiation and now the proliferation of 5G into space. This is contamination of all the elements: fire, earth, air and water. Effectively what's going on is we have a great battle that is occurring, a spiritual battle for the control of the, I think about a battle as two people either side of, let's call it a tug of war. And we have the ego on one hand wanting to continue to live the way we've always lived, amass power, do things for the personal self, gain dominion of the material world. And then we have the soul calling us, inviting us towards our awakening. So this great battle is there for the soul of humanity, and the battle is focused upon the control and power of land, oil, fire, earth, air and water. So we have to choose. Do we choose to protect land? Do we choose to exploit it? Do we choose to purify and protect oceans and rivers for the good of all, or do we exploit them? Nature and her resources are for sharing, for protection, not exploiting, and for not holding. Yes, and of course this issue of the space race and the race to Mars, humanity and many governments around the planet are seeking to export war into the solar system. This is the great battle. You know, we are better than this as a species. Another frightening concern that's coming is that not only is the battle for control over the physical resources, land, oil, fire, earth, air and water, been very well evident, but now we have a battle for control of our bodies. You know, enforced vaccinations, flu vaccinations. I saw something online this morning where it's being rolled out, and I think it's happening in many, many countries, that for the good of the whole, the governments are deciding that certain vaccinations must be essential. Now, this is nothing new. Vaccination's been a brilliant tool for the controlling of illnesses earlier in the 20th century, but increasingly the high ethical principles underpinning the rollout of vaccinations have been degraded and exploited and corrupted for money and for power. Okay? And in the midst of all of this, the free will that humanity have to choose their own fate is being exploited. So normally one would say that one had the right to choose which air I breathe, where I live, which country I visit, what medicine I take. But that inalienable right to have control over your own body is being threatened with the enforced vaccinations, with the digital signatures to supposedly protect people against the pandemic. And these digital signatures and the enforced vaccinations are being rolled out in many countries. Ireland, Australia, probably all over Europe. And the question to ask here is, who controls your body? And the difficulty really is that if the government says that it knows what's best for you and that you have to cede your power over your body, is this democracy? Because increasingly this body being hijacked as a commodity by governments and the multinationals and big pharma will limit your ability to access certain health care, to access a job, to be able to travel, to be able to visit your elderly relative in an aged care facility, and goodness knows what else. Okay, the great battle for control is very much evident in the banking sector, the finance sector, and you could say that this is the fight to the death around power and money and control. And we've seen this with cash gradually becoming seen as something that needs to be removed, and that there's a push for all nations to move to a digital currency and to make cash illegal. At this juncture, I think I might just talk about the mythology of Taurus from the perspective of Hercules, who is known in the esoteric literature as the world aspirant, who eventually becomes the world disciple. Aspirant, we are all world aspirants, we are all aspiring to lift the human species to live a better, more fulfilling life that benefits all of us. We are evolving as a family of humanity. And while one person on earth remains in darkness, we all exist in darkness. And the tests of Taurus, as epitomised by the world disciple, as Hercules becomes, are the tests associated with his capacity to control matter. And this is what's facing humanity at the moment. Are we controlling matter for the good of the whole or for the good of a few? Now, the task that Hercules had to face was to capture the sacred bull on Crete and bring it to the mainland for delivery to the king. And I've been to Crete, and all over Crete there are beautiful images from the Minoan time, actually, of the sacred bull. And this is the sacred bull is the elevated, purified Taurian energy. Now, this test symbolises humanity's need to harness our lower nature. That's your lower nature and my lower nature. To take control of our greed, our sensuality, our inequality between the sexes, and our desire to possess and control. One of the most alarming statistics that I've heard in the last couple of months in Australia, I think I heard it said that the increases of women calling for help because of domestic violence had skyrocketed 14% in the last 2 months. When women are unable to leave the house and are locked up with partners, husbands, family members who then perpetrate violence against them. So this inequality between the sexes has been highlighted. Any desire to possess and control any resource or any other body is the lower vibration of Taurus. And the task that we have, as Hercules had, was to be able to master the lower nature. And in this mythology, the lower nature is seen as the sacred bull on Crete, so that we can lift our collective self towards a higher purpose. Now, the keynote of Taurus, which applies to all of us at this juncture, in the old-fashioned language, is "Let struggle be undismayed." I looked that up to see what the word undismayed meant. And basically, it means to not lose courage, to not give up, to not fall into despair, disillusionment, disheartenment, to not sink into a pit of fear and bury our heads in the sand and sink into blindness and refuse to have our eyes wide open. There's so much propaganda, there's so much fear-based politics, there's so much fear driving humanity. And we have to keep up the good fight. Keep up the struggle, recognise that we are in a struggle to the death with the global ego in a period known as the Great Battle, and that we are better than this as a species. Now, in the myth, Hercules succeeded in capturing and taming the bull, and he rode it triumphantly into Cyclops. Now, this image of capturing and taming the bull is recognising, yes, I'm human, I've got tendencies to want to put my head in the sand, to try and control something, to be greedy, to possess, to use power over, to fall into greed or lust or sensuality. You've only got to look at the drama that happened around toilet paper hoarding. Slightly funny, but I did remember hearing something about in France, I think they were hoarding wine and condoms, and I forget, various nations were hoarding various things, and the Australians, for some bizarre reason, were hoarding toilet paper. But any degree of hoarding is this desire to control. We've fallen into the trap of the lower bull. So Hercules manages to tame and then ride the bull. We have to rise above our desire to control the material. And he rides the bull triumphantly into Cyclops. Now Cyclops, I don't know if that's a place, it must be. Cyclops represents the single eye of illumination. And which we access, however briefly, when we choose to put aside self-interest in favour of a higher purpose. So on a practical level, what does this mean? Well, how can I help those who have less than me? How can I assist? What can I share? Do I have housing? Do I have food? Do I have money? Do I have shelter? Do I have resources? What can I share rather than hoard? Whatever it is that you are holding, see if you can find a way of sharing it. Because it's no point saying, well, I'm already on the spiritual path. I don't need to share. I don't need to change. Every one of us has to examine what it is that we have been desiring to possess. And if you can identify what it is that you have desired to possess and give it up for the greater good, then that's a way that we lift collectively. And when we succeed through this effort of what is known as the higher will to tame our personal nature, our desire, then we can truly say, I see, and when the eye is opened, all is light. And we are just on the other side. I think it's a day and a half, 2 days after the exact full moon. So we're still in the Vesak Festival's window, the 5-day window, where if we can lift ourselves, we have a contact, however briefly, to greater light. And this is the keynote of I see, and when the eye is opened, all is light. So to sum up, we are all spiritual aspirants because we're all members of humanity, and humanity is trying to lift to be the best that we can be. And to do this, let's put principles before profit. Let's identify, lift our eyes to a higher idealism, something that benefits the whole, and find light that's felt within the heart. Because we can no longer countenance greed and self-interest. My greed, my self-interest. We can no longer countenance national greed and self-interest. We can no longer countenance global greed and self-interest of the multinational corporations and the despotic governments. It's not good enough to say, let the governments sort it out, let the doctors sort it out, let the politicians sort it out, let the World Health Organization sort it out. I and you and us as individuals have to sort it out. How do we share? Where is our greed? Where is our self-interest? What is it that has held us in thrall, blinded? Let's change that. So as world aspirants, we have to rise to the challenge and stand up. And if we're able to do this, then apathy will give way to inner resolution, and find where you can stand and take what's the principle that you're prepared to take a stand on. There may be an issue, even if it means that it triggers your deepest fears of insecurity or safety or your home or your livelihood. Now, if the point is that the principle is more important than your safety, then stand upon that principle. Ask yourself, what can I share? Food, accommodation, resources, money, a caring ear. Let go of the me and mine in favour of the us and our, because that is the way forward to victory. Victory for the human species. Principles before profit is the test. Now these principles, they pull upon our heartstrings of all those who are inclined to lift the eye and so that we can collectively lift humanity. Let us respond to this impulse of the tests of Taurus as we move through Taurus. And we'll be moving into the time of Gemini, the third week of May, and we will arrive at the full moon. And hopefully between now and then I'll do another talk on the esoteric tests associated with the sign of Gemini. Thanks for your time. Hope you find it useful. If you do, please share. This is Chandra, Eastern Star Astrology Healing.com.